Well, g'day everyone, it's Jason Haynes here again from QPL Rural, and today I've got the great pleasure of talking to Andrew Bomm from Progressive Agriculture, should I say, in Wagga. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Yeah, no worries, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So, Andrew, today we're going to talk a little bit about water and water strategies going into the sort of 2018-2019 season, and we all know it's pretty dry as we're speaking at the moment. But look, first things first, Andrew, I was hoping you might introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Progressive Agriculture.
Yeah, no worries. Look, my background, Jason, previously I was CEO of the Rice Growers Association over at Leeton, so we had a fair bit of involvement in water policy development and providing information for irrigators in the Southern Basin about managing their risk, particularly given the changes to water regulation recently with the Basin Plan and water being removed from irrigation and going to the environment, that having an effect on price. We took a pretty strong role in trying to make sure that our members knew what was going on in the water market and how they could manage a little bit of the risk that had come in from having that supply reduced. So we had been doing a fair bit in that area, and they continue to do that. And I've gone out on my own. I've been working as a consultant, providing services to companies and government agencies and individual farmers. A lot of it related to water market information. So I'm not the foremost expert, and I certainly don't know everything, but I've got a bit of a handle on what's going on, and I'm pretty keen to share that information as much as I can.
We're pretty keen to hear it, Andrew, so that's good, thanks. Well, let's start on the water side of things. The irrigation season's sort of come to an end. A lot of the corn's off now. The cotton's still, that's drying down now. Harvest will be imminent in most areas. Tell me about the state of the system at the moment. Summarise the state of the system and what we can expect going forward.
Sure. Well, I guess like everything, there's a bit of history, and the history's been that irrigators came into this season carrying a lot of water from the previous season, which was a very wet one. So this time last year, irrigators were looking at if they had space to carry water in their general security accounts. They were looking at, $5 to $10 water in the Murrumbidgee. They were looking at $30 to $40 water in the Murray. And if they had any common sense, they were loading up and taking as much as they could through to the next season. So accounts were in pretty good shape coming into the season. Yes, it's been a pretty poor season for allocations, though, cropping levels have been pretty strong across both the Murray and Murrumbidgee valleys because people did have that water coming in. So they planted accordingly. There's not as much left in accounts, obviously, as there was the season before, and it's a pretty dry landscape at the moment, and that includes the catchment area, so it will require a fair bit of rain to wet things up before the water starts flowing into the dams again, so that'll certainly be in people's mind. They'll be looking at the moment in trying to work out whether there's value in adding to what's already in their accounts to carry over, and that'll be determined by a couple of things. How much water are they going to need given what cereal plantings are in train as we speak? How much is going to be required in case of emergency come spring if it hasn't rained? So those are your critical water needs, and the price sensitivity tends to be a bit lower for those needs because you're better off finishing off a crop than having it yield poorly just because you didn't have a couple of megs per hectare for it at the end. They'll also be looking at next year's summer cropping. and trying to work out whether water at the current price is worth carrying with any space left in accounts. And this year, unlike last where you should have just bought everything you could, this year's a bit of a trickier scenario because water prices, in the Murray, they're 140, temporary water, in the Bidgie, it's 160. Depending on what you're doing with that water, you may or may not be able to make money off it at that price. Where you'd be mad to buy carryover water at $250, we're currently in an area where it's probably a touch and go decision for a lot of people. And it will really depend, on whether their particular enterprise is delivering the kind of returns that can justify paying that at the moment. People will also be considering whether to buy forward water. And that basically means that they can buy water now for delivery next year guaranteed, no risk of spill, as there is with carryover, as irrigators will know. And that's going for around 190 in the Murray and Bidgie, a bit less, probably more like 160, 170 in the Murray at the moment. That's not a bad option if your cropping enterprise can justify returns on that price of water. It may be touch and go for some, but it's not a bad option for a couple of reasons. One is that it can secure, what you need to secure your planting needs. And if you're averaging out your water cost, buying some water at 190, averaged with some lower cost water, you can probably justify doing that. It's an interesting time and a challenging decision-making point for irrigators just at the moment. But, if you're trying to diversify your access to water, forwards aren't a bad option. You don't need to load up on everything you need, but they can be a pretty good risk management strategy.
So just flesh that out a bit for me. Like, what are the different options? Like, we all know about trading temporary water and having allocation water and the like. What are the different trading options, with forwards and all those sorts of things? Just run through that if you can, please. Yeah,
so it's about trying to get as much water as you can for next season at the lowest possible price. And, if irrigators are being fair dinkum, they're also pricing the water that they're allocated because there's a cost to holding that water, and the cost of holding it is what you could get on the temporary market for it. So what irrigators need to be thinking of is, how can I get, as much water as I possibly can at the lowest price? And, we don't know what the weather's going to do, but generally the good irrigators that I see chip away at securing that supply on a consistent basis. So, they'll have a few losses, if the weather turns against them. So if they go and buy forward water now and it buckets down in June and July and all of a sudden there's water everywhere, they're probably paid overs for that. But on the whole, a strategy where you're securing supply for next season in regular tranches, is probably the most effective way to do it, up to the point where you think that, at average cost, that water's just not going to provide a return for you. If you've got space in accounts to carry water, then you're balancing out, what does this water cost and can I make a return on it? And at that cost, what is the risk of that water spilling out of my account if you get a strong allocation next year? Now, at the moment, it doesn't seem like there'll be a strong allocation, but we never know what's going to happen with the weather. So that's buying for carry. Yeah. But you can lock away water that doesn't have spill risk in forward water products. So someone else holds that water somewhere, they carry that risk of spill, they need to deliver to you. And, there's not much of a premium. Normally there's a fair premium on that. For that certainty of delivery and making sure that you're not going to lose that water. And there's not much of a premium on that at the moment because there's plenty of carryover space. So, that's something that can be in the mix as well. If you buy water at that price and the weather turns even drier, that's then water that you hold that you can either use for cropping that others can't, or you can sell back onto the temporary market for a profit. But on the other side of the equation, if you purchase that forward water now and it buckets down rain, you've probably paid overs relative to simply going in the temporary market next year. So those are the trade-offs that everyone's thinking about. There are some, as you asked about products, there are some opportunities in the market to lease entitlement if it's not if there's not a permanent entitlement that irrigators own, or they don't own enough permanent entitlement to rely on allocation. But you then wear the risk of allocation there. So if you hold, if you lease 100 megs and you get 50%, you only get the 50 megs of it. That's going for around $90 at the moment in the Murrumbidgee. And
it could be, and so what you get out of that is whatever your allocation is times your $90.
Whatever the allocation against that entitlement is. So if you get 100% allocation, you've only paid $90 for your water. If you get 50, you've paid 180 per megalitre. Yep. Generally speaking, because we don't know what's going to happen, having a mix of these strategies is a good idea. So if you've got a little bit of forward water, you've locked away some water, even though it's a bit more expensive for your absolutely critical needs. If you lease a bit of entitlement, or if you own entitlement, you've then got, you're then protected against, paying too much for a forward product, because if it rains and you've paid over, at least then if it rains a lot, you've got significant supply at your disposal. So it's about being in a position where, if it's dry or it's wet, at least you're able to live with the outcome, and having a bit of a diverse acquisition strategy allows you to do that.
Yeah. So, by the way, in this day and age, particularly with cotton and those sorts of things, there's cotton contracts out a number of years ahead. You can, it's just another risk management tool going forward, I suppose. And a good way.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And this is where cotton particularly has been at a real advantage in the market over a crop such as rice, because in the rice industry, because of the pool arrangements, growers haven't had as much certainty about what price they're going to receive. That's changing with what Sunrise is doing at the moment, in providing some clearer price indications and some contract arrangements. But cotton's really been in a good spot, because if you can lock away, $5.50 a bale over, the next 3 years, you can then go into that water market with some degree of certainty that you can go and procure whatever you need now. And if you've got additional allocation that comes as a bonus next year, you can say, oh, well, that's great. I'll carry whatever I can. I'll try and park some of it maybe somewhere else on a Victorian licence, which some do. Or I'll just sell it and get rid of it, or whatever it happens to be. They've got, and they have had a lot clearer strategies at their disposal, because they've known well in advance from year to year about what they can afford to pay for water and what will provide a profitable return. So that link between commodity price, locking in commodity prices, and then the related ability to lock in your water price has been really favourable for those guys, and they've taken advantage of it. And it's one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of demand for water flow from the Murray to the Bidgie this year. Strong cotton prices and plenty of carryover that had been held over in the Murray, and a lot of that water.
Do you think that inter-valley transfer thing is something that's going to continue into the future, or is that with the basin plan and those sorts of things? Do you think that sort of inter-valley transfer is going to be a bit limited in the future? What's your impression there?
Well, everyone now, I think, well, most irrigators now understand that having some geographical diversity in your portfolio can have some real benefits. We've had seasons where, the Bidgie storages have been disappointing relative to the Murray storages, and you've had very poor allocation, or vice versa. And so, or prices have been significantly different in one valley or another. So if you have the ability to procure water, in a cheaper priced valley and shift it to where you're using it, great benefit. However, the more and more people that want to do that, the more pressure that places on the physical limits of the system. So between the Murray and the Murrumbidgee, there's a 100 gigalitre sort of trade window. And if everyone's got the same idea about shifting water from cheap valleys to expensive ones, the system can't physically sustain that. So it's a good strategy, but it can sometimes pay significant dividends, or it can sometimes leave you stuck with water in a valley that you want, one valley, and you want to use it in the other. And we've seen the trade between the Murray and the Murrumbidgee closed more often than it's been open in recent years. It was closed the other way not that long ago, where you couldn't bring water into the Murray Valley from the Murrumbidgee because of demand for cotton and horticulture in the Murrumbidgee Valley this year. You've seen a lot of demand going into the Bidgee, and trades closed that way now, and it's hard to see it opening again in the foreseeable future. So, it's a bit of an unknown, and the system for getting water through when the window opens is really not transparent, because most of it's managed on broker licenses, and no one's really got a clear handle on how that works and who manages to get through the window first. So, while it is good to have a diversified portfolio, it does sometimes mean you sell your water in, that you hold in a different valley, sell it into that valley and buy it back somewhere else, potentially at a more expensive price. So I think that valley trade will continue to be closed more often than it's open, because when the rush comes in one way or the other, it tends to come pretty quickly now that people hold licenses across both valleys.
Yeah, and people are watching it a lot more too. Like, as farms get bigger and people focus on water trade so much more important as agriculture changes. And as you said, the demand for those products and the demand for the transfer is going to be more and more with time.
Yeah, that's right. You've got some significant corporate holders who are pretty sophisticated in the way that they manage their various entitlement assets and shift water from when they get the opportunity from one valley to another, and try and obtain any opportunity for arbitrage in the market they can. You've also got some big, family farming operations who are now very sophisticated. You've got a broker network who try and differentiate themselves in the marketplace by providing strategic advice on water transfer and certainly market their ability to get water through. So it's, in theory, holding a diversified portfolio is good. In practice, it's a lot harder to execute than many of us realised, 3 or 4 years ago that it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is the face of agriculture in all our valleys change. We've certainly seen the rise of cotton in the Murrumbidgee Valley, and it's down in the Murray as well now. And the big move in the last few years has been almonds and the nut industry. You're seeing this shift, I suppose, of water assets towards these higher valued, higher return crops as well. It's certainly a changing face of agriculture.
Yeah, it is. I think the really interesting dynamic is not so much the shift from one annual cropping option to another, which say there's water moved from rice and dairy to cotton, because those decisions are still made on an annual basis and they still reflect the type of entitlement, that general security entitlement, which has that variable allocation from one season to another, and you can switch that crop, on or off as seasonal conditions determine. But the really interesting one is a lot of water in the temporary market, general security water allocated against those general security entitlements going towards permanent plantings and what were typically enterprises that relied on high security water entitlements.
Very good. So, long and the short of it is, budget for the season ahead. You're going to do a budget on your crops. You need to do a water budget as well, and consider those different classes of water and how you might, and what you plan, I suppose, for acquiring them and at what price.
Yeah. Look, a little bit of everything. I think it's a pretty good strategy. Depending on how much people have got in the pocket at the moment, and they may have a fair bit left over. Many don't though, because there's plenty of carryover. The carryover parking space isn't very high, so obviously a lot of people got carryover space. One of the things I encourage, in decision making is to not assume that the here and now will persist. So a lot of what happened last year was that people didn't really capitalise on cheap water prices because they thought there's so much water around, it's wet at the moment. That tended to over-influence thinking. And also there's a tendency when it's dry as well for people to probably underestimate the capacity for it to deliver normal rainfall and inflow conditions in the future. So a good way for me to think is think about, what's the price today relative to what it will be in 6 months' time if we have average inflows, and what would average inflows look like for allocation and supply, and how would that be reflected in a temporary market price, and think about it in those terms rather than the Bureau's not talking rain for the next 2 months, so we better buy whatever we can, or we're all doomed, and vice versa. When there's plenty of water in the system, there's probably not enough emphasis for many people on just trying to procure and squirrel away wherever they can, whatever water that they can. They're thinking long term, and I think starting using average circumstances, even though averages aren't very common in agriculture, but basing your decision-making processes on where we sit relative to the best thing we can predict in the future, which is an average. I think that's a good sort of mindset to be in when making these sorts of decisions.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Well, look, Andrew, thank you very much for your time today. That's been very informative.
Right.
And look,
happy to help.
Yeah, no, that's been fantastic. Well, so everyone, Andrew Bomm from Progressive Agriculture, thank you very much for listening again this week, and we'll be talking to you again next week. And if you'd like any more information, please feel free to give us a call at the office at any time, and we can work on a water strategy going forward. All right, thanks again, Andrew. Talk to you soon.
No worries, Jason. Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.